What Canada's Biggest Drug Dealer Taught Me About Love Bombing, written and narrated by Peter J. Merrick. A.K.A. Just an old fart trying to make sense of this beautiful and fucked up mysterious thing we call life, one lesson at a time. The older I get, the more I realize life's greatest teachers rarely arrive looking like teachers. Sometimes they wear a business suit, sometimes they wear handcuffs, and sometimes they wear a flight attendant's uniform and 3-inch heels. Apparently, this old fart thought he was meeting one of Canada's biggest former drug dealers to learn about the drug business. I even put on my imaginary sociologist cap, expecting to learn about marketing and distribution, addiction, and organized crime. I was completely wrong. I was about to learn one of the greatest lessons of my life about human nature. More than 25 years ago, I sat across from Serge Leclerc before prison, before politics, before cancer, before his death in 2010. Serge had built one of Canada's largest drug empires. I expected stories about crime. Instead, he explained the mechanics of dependency. He told me they never started by selling drugs. They gave them away, free. He searched for people carrying invisible pain, the lonely, the rejected, the anxious, the forgotten, the ones starving to belong, and the ones starving to be loved. Pain made people easier to target. Then, for a brief moment, he became exactly what they believed they needed. Only after dependency quietly took root did the invoice arrive. That was the business model. Apparently, this old fart thought Sergey was teaching me about cocaine, the marketing and sale of illegal drugs. Looking back, he was teaching me about human nature. Drugs were simply one product. Dependency was the real business. For years, I believed that lesson belonged only to the drug trade. Apparently, I was wrong again. The older I became, the more I recognized the same pattern everywhere. The product changes. The mechanics rarely do. I saw it in business. I saw it in friendships. I saw it in families. And eventually, I saw it in romantic relationships. The greatest predators rarely begin by taking. They begin by giving. They give attention. They give validations, affection, admiration, hope, and the intoxicating feeling that someone finally sees the real you. Then they become exactly what you believe you have been searching for. By the time you realize what is happening, dependency has already begun to take root. Apparently, this old fart would not fully understand Serge's lesson until decades later. Life would hand me one final clue from the last place I ever expected. Several decades later, life quietly handed me that final clue. I met a flight attendant during a short stopover in San Diego. She laughed while telling me something that made almost everyone around her smile. And I smiled too. She casually said, "All my ex-boyfriends called me a drug." Then she laughed again. I did not. Apparently, this old fart was no longer listening to her words. Every alarm bell I had built over the previous 25 years suddenly went off. My mind immediately went back to Serge. I was no longer hearing a funny story about old boyfriends. I was hearing the mechanics of dependency. She probably thought she was describing an amusing pattern in her romantic life. Apparently, this old fart was hearing something entirely different, a lesson that had been burned into my mind more than 25 years earlier by Serge Leclerc. Whether she realized it or not hardly mattered. She was describing the intoxicating power of becoming another person's emotional high. When she spoke, my mind immediately went to the biblical story of Samson and Delilah. Samson did not lose because he loved. He lost because he entrusted his greatest strength to someone who did not value it the way he did. Apparently, this old fart has learned that some people quietly announce exactly how they move through relationships. They do not always hide it. Sometimes they laugh while telling you. People often tell you exactly who they are. They do not always mean to, but if you listen carefully, they usually do. Serge's lesson suddenly came rushing back. The mechanics were identical. Drugs are not addictive because of what they are. They are addictive because of the feeling they create, and people spend years trying to experience that first high again. Apparently, people can become addicted to another human being for exactly the same reason. Today, one version of it has a name: love bombing. First comes attention, then affection and validation, is admiration and promises, and the intoxicating feeling that someone finally sees the real you. You feel understood, you feel chosen, and you begin believing you have finally found your person. That feeling is exactly why it works. You are not chasing the person, you are chasing the feeling. Drug addicts have a phrase for it. They call it chasing the dragon. They spend years trying to recreate that first euphoric high, never realizing they are no longer chasing the drug. They are chasing a memory that no longer exists. Apparently, love bombing works much the same way. You are no longer chasing the person you first met. You're chasing the memory of how they made you feel, hoping that first high somehow returns. Then something quietly changes. The attention becomes inconsistent. Affection becomes conditional. And the finish line keeps moving. Without realizing it, you begin working harder. You give more, you excuse more, you tolerate more. Slowly, almost without noticing, you become someone you barely recognize. Eventually, you become someone you no longer like or respect. Whether this is conscious or unconscious on their part hardly matters. The outcome is always the same. And some people are not looking for a partner. They are looking for someone to feed the emptiness within themselves by creating dependency instead of building intimacy. That is why I call them spiritual vampires. Not because they feed on your actual blood, but because they slowly feed on your confidence, your peace, your self-respect, your identity, and eventually your very essence, until there is very little of you left. Then the invoice arrives. Sometimes the invoice is money, but more often it is something far more valuable: your confidence, your peace, your dignity, your self-respect, your identity, and sometimes years of your life, years spent trying to get back to the person you met at the beginning, a person who may never have existed at all. Sometimes what you fell in love with was not a whole person, but a carefully constructed reflection designed to draw you in. Looking back, Serge thought he was teaching me how one of Canada's biggest drug dealers built an empire. What he was really teaching me was one of the oldest principles of manipulation ever discovered. The dealer is never selling the product. The dealer is selling the first high, knowing the customer will spend everything they have trying to experience it one more time. Apparently, some people do exactly the same thing with love. Healthy love leaves you stronger than it found you. Manipulation quietly leaves you emptier. For that lesson, I remain strangely grateful to Serge. It has protected me in business, in friendships, and in love. Most importantly, it has taught me to recognize dependency long before the invoice arrives. I hope it now does the same for you. Peter J. Merrick, A.K.A. the old fart. If you meet a spiritual vampire, purge them immediately.